Mid basses are iconic in the EDM scene right now. They sound so just juicy, just like, just delicious, just succulent, just all of that. But sometimes it can be a little tricky to do right. A lot of times your mid basses can end up sounding flat and thin, or they don't fit very well in your mix. Thankfully, I'm here to show you how to make heavy mid basses that sound like this. Hey everyone, this is TGK with another tutorial video. I wanted to do a tutorial like this for a while now because I struggle to make good mid basses. If this video manages to help you create some thick basses, be sure to zap that subscribe button and friggin' take a hammer to the like button. Break your monitor. Anyway, with the intro aside, let's talk about what exactly mid basses are for. Mid basses are low octave sounds that have a lot of mid information in them. EDM often lacks a strong mid range due to the aggressive low cuts and over the top compression, which stands for OTT. But mid basses are often integrated into songs to bring back a nice, clean, potent mid range that cuts through the mix. Mid basses often have some sort of noise mixed in with them to get a really gritty, recognizable high end as well. A common mid bass almost everyone knows is the classic massive buzz saw. Just take a saw wave, some white noise, and throw it through a tube distortion, and you get that classic thick sound that you have probably heard dominate in many older complextro/melodic dubstep songs. We can use this sound as a basic example as to how to make a mid bass. We have a basic shape, a saw wave. Basic waveforms are nice to use for mid basses, which I'll explain later. We have some noise playing with the saw wave, and then it's running through intense distortion. Before we get into the actual sound I made, I'd like to point something out that might help you with your music career. All this stuff may seem pointless to say, and you may just want to hear how I made the sounds, but I'm teaching you how to make mid basses, not how to make a specific sound. Learning the general knowledge of mid basses will help you make ones on your own instead of just relying on presets.
Shut up! Shut up!
Finally, with all that out of the way, let's begin the tutorial. Okay, so I have 3 layers. The fourth is the sub, if you want to consider that a layer, but I won't just because we're talking about mid basses, not how to make a sub. Everyone knows how to do that. But I got 3 layers. The first thing when you're making mid basses is often you want to layer, usually like not as processed sounds with more processed sounds, or just a lot of processed sounds on top of each other, because when you process a sound a lot, then it loses strong mid range. So you got to make sure you keep that mid range in there because it's a mid bass. So let's go over the first one. The first sound in here, I'm going to disable the group effects I have on here, and the effects in here, and this. So the first thing we have is just this little thing in Serum. Sounds like this without really anything on it, just the 2 oscillators on. So it has this strong fundamental sort of sound with this thingy. It's an interesting sound. Oh wait, this is on. But this sound gives it a nice fundamental. It's a very nice, just like punchy sound, and I have a little pitch envelope which adds a little impact at the beginning, as you can see in the waveform right here. And so I have amplitude modulation with this waveform, which is slightly mixed in with the levels. You kind of, when you're making mid basses, you kind of, mix and match, and just it kind of depends on what the look of your waveform is. Like I used an oscilloscope to help me make this. This is like a really high-pitched sound with the sync, but with the amplitude modulation and like taking into account phase and stuff, you get this. So cool looking waveform. It's still using basic wavetables instead of like complex stuff in like spectral, because like using stuff in spectral like Reese Mess or something like that, like it's like really messy and noisy, and you're getting a lot of the noise from the noise oscillator. So just use basic wavetables. Another thing about phase is the random knob. You're going to want to turn this down all the way, because when you're doing things like amplitude modulation and stuff like that, you can get different results. So like if I turn the random phase up, why don't you hear variation? I don't know. Okay, we got 2 saw waves. They both have random phase on. With both random phases up, it sounds like a regular saw wave. Both random phases down, sounds like a regular saw wave. But if one has random phase on, even just a little bit, and if one has it completely off, if they're just like not synced, you're gonna get like some calm filter stuff going on. If you don't understand what the random phase is, it's essentially this phase knob. So, man, I'm getting really deep into this. The phase is essentially just where the wavetable starts. If I pitch it down really low, you'll notice change in this. You see how it starts like right here in this middle range? It like sweeps up starting right there. That's where the sound starts. If we move the phase to the beginning, that means it'll start here. And as you can see now, it looks kind of like this. It goes up, all the way down, and then up again, up to the center again. So see? You get that little movement right there. Anyway, that's just a quick explanation of what the phase and random knobs do. So you're definitely just going to want to keep the random knobs down unless you have unison on them, which I don't recommend unison because after putting on unison on an oscillator and then running it through distortion, it's really messy. I hope that made sense. Just keep the random knobs down because then you won't have to deal with any sort of phasing issues, just nothing. Main sound coming from the oscillator should be mono, so no unison. And then I have the noise, I just used bright white and then ran it through 100% tube distortion. And as you can see, like, boom, that's a mid bass already. You get the nice, strong, like, fundamental. That's like it in a nutshell, but then there's a lot more you can do, so stay tuned. The first thing I did was this filter. I had a low pass filter here. It's not doing a ton because it's only affecting the first oscillator. I didn't really pay too much attention because what I really wanted was this resonance, okay? This peak right here is critical because this peak is basically affecting what the distortion would sound like, because when you put a resonance somewhere, then the distortion will really amplify that. You'll get some really crispy harmonics when you do that. So with it off, it's like that, but with it on, it sounds more like a mid bass instead of just this aggressive thing with this screechy thing. But I added a lot of things to it. I started with an OTT.
What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you?
I did some EQ in here, so I'll just turn that on. It's really high pass, but that's because I'm not using this as the main layer for the mid frequencies. These handle the mid frequencies more. Got Quadra Fuzz doing some more distortion, just taking down the high end a little bit. Boosting 1.5 to 10K, so like a big high-end area, and then distorting it as well. So got a gain reduction here. This is one of my favorite compressors for mid basses because it's like OTT, but it's not, because you don't get all the annoying artifacts, and it doesn't like upward compress either, so it like doesn't mess with your waveform at all. So if we turn it on, it's just like super hard compression, so I use that a lot. Intense multi-band compression going on as well. A lot of this is going to be just intense compression and distortion. So yeah, and then a disperser to make it nice and thick. You could stop with this, but I like adding different types of harmonics and a strong mid layer. For the next one, we're giving it more of a creative tone here. So it's just gonna be this analog BD sine wave table that's an analog right here. It has some sync on it, and then just a saw wave, and then another pitch envelope to give it that nice punch. And the noise. And then now we have a phaser, of course, because it's a phaser layer. And this phaser is going to add unique properties to our bass. The rate at 0 so that it's not changing. And then the depth at 21 and phase frequency at 106. The sound with the phaser on it runs through heavy tube distortion. And you get that nice, delicious thing going on there. Gain reduction, no OTT on this one because I want this mid layer to shine through, because OTT will destroy your mid range. And then we have some EQ, just a high cut, and then Camel Crusher. It's just the compressor on fat mode, I guess, so. The last one I have is a Neuro layer, and you're gonna want your mid bass frequencies in the mid range to be very wide as well. Wide mids sound very nice. I don't know, there's just something about them that just like turns me on. I don't like how that sounded. Anyway, moving on. This layer is very thin compared to the other layers. It's okay, it doesn't need to be like the craziest bass ever. This layer is specifically for the nice stereo mids. So literally just a square wave and a saw wave, nothing different, except there's just some level differences. And of course, random phase always down. First thing I do, no noise. And then this tip again where I got the low pass but with the resonance. And so this resonance will distort a lot. Got the hyper dimension, adding some width. Remember, I don't like using unison when going into distortion, so I just use like stereo effects on a mono sound. So turn on the tube distortion. So it's just this nice kind of basic sound, and then I run it through this kind of unique filter just to have some fun. So that does a lot. It makes it kind of sound like Nero-y. And then Camel Crusher for more distortion. But you see how it's very stereo, so that's nice. And then I add an auto panner to really push it over the edge. So it's just panning back and forth like this. Width is only 50, and I have some smoothing and stuff going on, so it's not like hard panning left and right, because that would get a little overwhelming. So it's just super nice and stereo. And with all of that, you get this. But everything sounds kind of like not very well mixed right now and kind of underwhelming, sort of. This is like the last big tip. You're going to want to route all of your layers to a group and process them together, because when you use compression or distortion on multiple layers, those effects act as like glue, and they glue the layers together and make them sound like one sound. I got a basic EQ here, light mid boosting and high boosting, and then just a low cut. And now I got more EQ as well. Frequency is a mid-side EQ, so this is a sideband, and it's boosting the sides around this area. And then we have Ravage. Now Ravage is one of my favorite distortions for mid basses. It almost acts like OTT. If I disable this, this is what the sound looks like. A little all over the place, just kind of peaks everywhere, but I turn this on. And it kind of like smashes everything and like almost brings stuff up too. And makes it really nice and messy and sort of gritty too. So love Ravage. Ravage is good. One of these algorithms will do something good for your sound most of the time. And you just got to play with the inputs and the drive and the low pass and high pass and other things like that. And some of these parameters down here, and you get something really nice. The sound is very messy right now. Generally, you know, mid basses wouldn't be this messy, but since this is obviously the main element in this drop I made right here, I wanted to make it very prominent. You don't have to have distortion this intense, of course. To mix in a mid bass to your song, it's just really taking out high end and making sure other things don't have a ton of mid range that could phase with your mid bass. Just make sure when you're sculpting the sound, the waveform doesn't look like crap. That's essentially, and you could do that by a lot of the tips I just discussed. Format filter, this adds more interesting things, more interesting peaks and stuff to it. Another multi-band compressor with lots of compression. And then ROM, which is just for the reverb sweeps. And there you go, like that's it. That's all I did. And then of course, stuff sounds a lot more full with the sub. And if I take off the G clip, which I use for the master, you can see the waveform doesn't look bad with the sub. And by itself, I like to just compare what it would look like if I added OTT. What it looks like, and then with OTT, yeah, it's a lot more like noisy and it sounds thinner, and there's this huge click at the beginning, so don't recommend OTT for mid basses. All right, well, I think that's all I need to say about mid basses. Hopefully most of the stuff in this video makes sense. I just kind of ranting along, just like, don't do this and do this and don't do this and you know, that's what I usually do, so you're probably used to it by now. Make sure you freaking slap the tube distortion on the like button and subscribe. Comment if you learned something, because that just makes me feel better. That makes me feel better about doing these videos, because they could just like not be helping anyone, and it'll be really sad. I'm gonna go now. Peace out, my boys. Have an electrifying day.